Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. El is one thing, because it's literally the generic Hebrew word for God, but saying the Jewish name of God is a major taboo, to the point of a euphemism treadmill where very religious Jews won't even say the word God. Now, I'm not religious, and neither are most Jews around the world, but even secular Jews have their limits. Most still fast on Yom Kippur, I've known atheists who still keep kosher, and as long as I've lived, I've never been able to bring myself to say. Now back to history. After the fall of Israel, you'd think that the massive influx of refugees into Judah would spin the kingdom into crisis, but if anything, it had the opposite effect. For one, the Israelites spoke the same language and practiced the same religion, which made the process much easier. This is what ultimately led to the legend that Judah and Israel had once been united under the kings David and Solomon, and the subsequent origin myth that both nations were descended by blood from a single patriarch named Israel, aka Jacob. Furthermore, Judah needed the Israelites. Israel had always been the wealthier and more populous nation, so the influx of gold and labor was crucial to Judah's long-term goal of full independence from Assyria. 4 years after the fall of Israel, 25-year-old Hezekiah ascended to the Jewish throne. Hezekiah was a big deal, even by royalty standards. He was born during the ministry of Isaiah, and a lot of biblical scholars believe that he's the baby Emmanuel, who Isaiah predicts will bring Judah to greatness. That's a lot of hype to live up to, and Hezekiah didn't disappoint, because with all his fresh labor and capital, he became the builder king. The majority of Jewish architecture from the Davidic period can be dated to his reign. Jerusalem, until now a city that could be measured in square feet, was quadrupled in size, with huge defensive walls stretching across the valley of Siloam. By far the most impressive of Hezekiah's works today is the Siloam Tunnel, an underground aqueduct excavated through half a kilometer of solid rock in order to maintain the city's water supply during a siege.
Right here. It's even more impressive if you see it. Though it's pretty impossible to walk through because it's the middle of January right now. It's pretty impressive until you find out that he wasn't the first. This tunnel was an earlier irrigation system for the same city over 1,000 years earlier still.
I just want to take a step back and point out that the city of Rome is just being founded at this point, and even at the height of their power, they built their aqueducts above the ground. With all this, it's easy to understand the widespread confidence that Hezekiah would lead the Jews to final victory over Assyria. And it's easy to see why the effort failed. In 701 BCE, the Cushite rulers of Egypt renounced their vassalship to Assyria and declared independence, followed quickly by Edom, Philistia, Ammon, the Phoenician states, and finally Judah. The Assyrian army had just put down a decades-long insurgency in Babylon, so it looked like the empire was on its last legs. But the Assyrian king Sennacherib managed to sweep all of Judah's neighbors back into submission in a matter of weeks, before setting his sights on Jerusalem. The Cushites tried to break the ensuing siege, but were stopped at Ekron. And while Sennacherib failed to breach the walls of Jerusalem, he only failed at Jerusalem, forcing Hezekiah to surrender by default. No one can know if Hezekiah and Sennacherib met, but I'm struck by how similar they were. Both were 39 years old at the time and best known as great builders who had won massive upset victories against each other, so it's tempting to imagine them as having a mutual respect for each other. Whether or not this is true, it's telling that Sennacherib not only gave Hezekiah full credit for beating him in battle, but let him stay on the throne and elevated Judah to the status of most favored nation. Isaiah, who by the way was still alive at this point, thus concluded his ministry by proclaiming that Hezekiah had indeed brought Judah back to greatness, and that judgment was at hand. Despite winning most favored nation status, Judah's economy stagnated for several years until Hezekiah's death in 687 BCE. His son Manasseh attempted to remedy the bust by allowing the rural elite to rebuild the high places, mountaintop shrines to minor gods that Hezekiah had destroyed in accordance with the prophets. Considering the religion that Judaism became, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the prophets were really angry about this, but since it coincided with Judah's transformation into a net exporter of goods for the first time ever, it only emboldened Manasseh to reverse more of his father's reforms, going as far as to execute many of his deputies and sacrifice live children to the bronze god Molech. And while that sounds like over-the-top revisionist propaganda, we know it's true because the Greeks and Romans wrote about the same thing happening in Carthage, where Molech was also worshipped. Needless to say, it was a chaotic free-for-all when Manasseh finally kicked the bucket in 643. His son Ammon only reigned for 2 years before being assassinated by his own servants, probably on the order of the high priest Hilkiah. And you know it's bad when the priests of the Lord are ordering hits on the king, but boy did it ever get the job done. Hilkiah became regent over the 8-year-old king Josiah and steadily influenced him to reinstate many of Hezekiah's reforms. At just 18, Josiah published the earliest form of the Bible, comprising the books of Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and most of Kings. While most of what we now know as the Torah already existed as oral tradition, Deuteronomy revised that tradition into what we now know as Jewish law, including the concept of monolatry. Judaism didn't quite deny the existence of other gods yet, but it did prohibit the worship of them. Instead of worshiping at the high places, the 23 priestly families from the countryside would rotate weekly duties, serving alongside the high priest in Jerusalem, enabling them to maintain their own power while strengthening Josiah's. With Judah looking ever more prosperous and godly, Josiah turned his attention outward. The Assyrian Empire rapidly began disintegrating as the ever-frustrating Babylon rose up again and founded its own empire in 626. This was good for Judah in the short term, but Josiah freaked out when Assyria allied with its former enemy Egypt to push the Babylonians back. This threat to the regional balance of power was so severe that Josiah led an army to meet the Egyptians, only to be slaughtered along with most of the Jewish army at Megiddo. This didn't work out too well for the Egyptians either. After failing to relieve the last remaining Assyrian garrison at Haran, Pharaoh Necho II watched firsthand as the Assyrian Empire disappeared forever, and led a punitive expedition against Judah. He replaced the new king Jehoahaz with his brother Eliakim, who subsequently changed his name to Jehoiakim and became an Egyptian vassal. For a few years, the situation seemed to level off, but with Babylon now the regional hegemon, Egypt had exhausted itself, and things were going to get ugly. Hey, thanks for checking out my latest video. If you want to help the channel grow, you can always donate on my Patreon page, or simply like, share, and subscribe. Today's background image is the Samaritan Temple at Mount Gerizim. I'll see you next time.